But 40% of your happiness level is within your control. So take control, take action, be happy.
That 40%.
That's right.
It's a choice.
But still, with all this talk of happiness, it happens to all of us at times. We just get bummed out. But when does being bummed become something more?
Gail Trauco is the author of Conquering Grief from Your Own Front Porch, and she joins us now. Welcome, Gail. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Are you happy this morning?
I'm very happy.
Good.
Good.
But you know what? Robin Williams and Marilyn Monroe were not happy.
No.
They were celebrities that had clinical depression.
Yeah. It's a lot more common, I think, than we are aware of.
Let's talk about the difference between clinical depression that could lead to very tragic events versus somebody that just wakes up and says, I don't want to get out of bed today. I'm not happy.
A clinical depressive disorder should always be managed by a physician. Excessive fatigue. You sleep more than 8 hours. You find yourself sleeping 12 hours. Uncontrollable crying, anger. Your appetite may change. You may have increased appetite or decreased appetite. All of these things could be clinical depression and should be evaluated by a physician. We all have points during the day, though, every single day when you're like, oh, I feel a little blue. And there are mistakes that we can avoid to not feel depressed. Well, the first mistake to avoid is the Michael Jackson mistake. Isolation. Michael Jackson barricaded himself in his Neverland Ranch. He passed his depressive disorder on to his daughter, Paris. She made her first suicide attempt in June of 2013. She has a history of cutting herself. You can see scars on her arms in any picture in the media that you get a close-up of.
Now wait, before we move on to the next one, did he pass it on genetically, or did he pass it on in a sort of a conditioning way, growing up, environmental?
Not knowing her, quote, medical history or looking at things, I would say this would be more of an environmental-induced depression.
Not so sure she's his biological daughter.
True.
So.
I mean, that's enough. Well, Cindy, you're opening up a whole other can of worms.
Well, I mean, be tough to do it genetically if she doesn't have any of his.
This is true, but we don't know that.
This is true.
Yeah, yeah.
But just being around that isolated gentleman could have rubbed off on her.
Moved on to the children. The second mistake to avoid, the Anna Nicole Smith slip, self-medication, drugs and alcohol. You know, Anna Nicole Smith's son had passed away a couple of years before she did, drug overdose.
Right.
So, again, from the parent to the child. Could have been environmental. He could have been exposed to things in the home. And the third mistake, the Robin Williams regret, suicidal thoughts. And everybody, whether people say it or not, most people have had that edge when you're going through some personal crisis, when you've had that thought. Is this really worth it? Do I want to go on?
Right.
Every single person, you know, no matter how strong you are, people will never say it. But there are hotlines, there are resources for people. If you feel pushed to that point that you have these suicidal thoughts, call 911.
You know, you always hear when somebody commits suicide, people say around the water cooler or what have you, what could be so bad in that person's life that makes them commit suicide? So what does drive that person over the edge?
That feeling of hopelessness and nobody there to help. You know, our society has changed so much. Extended family does not live around you anymore. You may not have that support system. You may be alone. And it's that loneliness and that isolation where people, these emotions magnify and they grow. And it's all of a sudden like a volcano exploding, and something has to happen. And that person is just at their wits' end and they don't know what to do. They don't want to go on. You know, there may be a medical patient that has pain from a chronic illness. And, you know, in Oregon, you know, it's legal for people to take their own life. You know, it's legal in some states. That's a totally separate issue. This is when people just have all this anger and these unresolved emotions. It can come from childhood. This builds up over time. You don't just decide today to commit suicide. This is something that's been building over a long period of time.
What about helping people deal with the stigma, though, that they think, I've got a mental problem, and we still put people in a box that when we hear mental illness, and we shouldn't do that, but they're scared, they don't want to be labeled, and so they just don't go.
The United States, of all the countries in the world, we prescribe more antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs than any other country in the world. That stigma is in your medical record when you're diagnosed with premenstrual syndrome, anxiety. All of a sudden, you have a depressive disorder. Well, people have to learn to speak up and realize themselves that this is just the way the United States practices medicine, and that it's perfectly normal for you to feel a little bit blue with premenstrual syndrome. If people have a medical condition, you know, they will grieve or feel sad about this illness that they're having to deal with. Moms will grieve not having enough money to take care of their children financially. So there are so many circumstances that our society has forced us into this box that, you know, like bullying. These kids, so many of them committing suicide, young, especially young females. That is so sad, and that's my goal, is to educate people that, you know what, it's okay to feel a little bit blue or depressed every day, but you need to be self-educated and aware of when your mood changes.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you've got some great tips in the book, Conquering Grief from Your Own Front Porch. And you mean conquering it from your home, where it's familiar to you. And lots of good information in there.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you so much, Gail.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Daytime, so don't go away.